This is Richard C. Lyons, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Richard's a busy, busy man, so we've got him just for a few short minutes today. We'll for sure have you back on. You wrote a book called The DNA of Democracy and kind of just talked about the makings of a democracy and where it comes from in history. And I thought it was such a fantastic book as I read through it. I mean, you really got to the building blocks of everything. So everybody should check that out. Look in the show notes. You'll see the DNA of Democracy in there. And actually get any of Richard's books because they're all well written. But one of the reasons why I wanted to have you back on is it's a very tumultuous time in our democracy. I'll bet our democracy is quite strong. Like it's protected by documents and a lot of history. What are your just general thoughts going in terms of we're less than just over a month out of the election? What are your thoughts today here in 2020?
Well, as I've been researching for the next volume of this series, which is more the modern era, I find our government has concentrated itself at the federal level and within the executive branch. And I believe this is why so many persons are hot-tempered today, why there are demonstrations, why the focus is critically on the judicial branch as a branch of government that's appointed through the executive. The reasons for that are that we don't feel fully representative any longer, Pete, because our representation has been taken out by agencies at the federal level where we're not represented at all, and also through judicial edict, where laws are created through the judicial branch by negating representative law. So I think this is a critical juncture where either we're going to become even more concentrated at the federal level, or devolve perhaps to where the states, guide themselves. I'm sorry, Pete, I've lost you.
Live technology. I'm still talking. It's still working on my end.
Okay, Pete, I got you back. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. Hey, so one of the things that went through via the Supreme Court, and again, this is not a knock on this thing, but I'm pointing my finger squarely at the legislature, but the gay marriage was basically decided via judicial fiat rather than independent states or some kind of federal legislation. It was done through the courts. Is that what you're talking about?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. And it goes to abortion and many other issues where laws were created in each state to deal with certain moral issues. And those moral issues were taken away from the state level and the people's representatives. And just a judicial edict was said that you cannot challenge the fact that there is abortion on demand and there is gay marriage throughout the country now.
Yeah, and again, the legislators refuse to solve these problems, so they get to wipe their hands clean of it. But yeah, we're still talking about abortion almost 50 years after Roe v. Wade. Mm-hmm. And again, this is no statement pro or against abortion,
right?
How we're set up, there is a morality problem. This is the thing I quite often say about abortion. I don't care where on the stool you stand, but it's a three-legged stool. You're compromising somebody's rights, either the unborn human, the woman, because the government shouldn't tell the woman that they have to have a baby. I understand that.
Right.
But also, we've completely ripped away the rights of a dude. What if you want to become a dad? What if you don't want to become a dad? All of a sudden, you're compelled by this three-legged stool that should really be decided locally,
Yeah, I hadn't regarded that aspect, but that's very true. And these are moral issues. Normally, these were dealt with by your synagogue or your church, or you discussed it in your religious, spiritual community. Even if you're a humanist, you would discuss it on that level. But it's being taken away, and that's part of the problem. It's been taken away and made a legal matter.
Yeah, and again, it becomes a political thing where someone's claiming the moral high ground, but there is no moral high ground in this. You've got three hilltops, and each one of them, I'm pro-abortion. I don't call it pro-choice. I just call it pro-abortion up until a certain point. I don't know when that point is, but I'm glad to have that discussion. Like, we shouldn't be aborting babies that are 2 weeks out, or
Mhm.
3 weeks out. I don't know where that line is, but there's a line there for me personally. Again, I'm not saying I'm absolutely for abortion. I think there's a lot of circumstances when it's the best of the shittiest options, but it's that's not how we do it, and we play around. So some states have a hard, are going for this hard, ban on it, and then other places are probably too liberal. I think our nation's always about balance, and isn't that sort of what a
That's a
democracy
very
has to
that's a
be?
that's a very key issue, and that's why I'm discussing this with regard to this election. Whereas before, many things were decided locally, or at the county level, or at the state level, or they were decided by your religious affiliation, your affinity, right, on moral matters. But now all these matters that were once decided among people democratically or spiritually are now being assigned to the federal government. The federal government used to not have anything to do with what a person believed, and now we're being told what is right and what is wrong by a too concentrated government. My feeling. So I believe the government has grown too great at the federal level.
I mean, I think you're right. And when you look at if you were to look, if they had a batting average, we would all be like, it might be some bench time for you guys because they're just not doing that
Well,
well.
this is what the second volume is about. It's about how do you keep from taking
Mm.
power over different areas of society as a government because you have the power to do it.
I
What
want to get,
keeps you from doing it? And that
yeah.
would be the Constitution, but that's being trampled over lately. So,
Let's cover a couple things within the Constitution and the Supreme Court. Then, since we're on that topic,
yeah.
Todd brings up a great question: when did America start to look at the Supreme Court as the lawmakers and not, adjudicators of law and conflict? So go ahead and answer that, and then I'll ask my next Supreme Court question.
Well, I think it was the Roe v. Wade was the biggest flashpoint in, and the judicial branch is just supposed to take laws generated by the legislature and approved by the executive and say, is this in keeping with the Constitution or not? In Roe v. Wade, they adapted the 14th Amendment to assure privacy, which assured abortion, which is a tangling of law.
Mm.
And so it took from the people's representatives their right to choose per state whether they would be allowing of abortion or no. So uh, I think that was the flashpoint. That's why this is so critical now, and why the fight is so animated
Mm.
with regard to this open seat.
When you look at the makeup of the court, right now we're looking at a possible 6-3 divide between what the Republicans want and what the Democrats want. And I can understand that. But in terms of the Constitution, it doesn't appear to be any problem with the president picking somebody and the Senate working to confirm them. Is it? I mean, that's just like the black and white of the thing. Everything else kind of becomes politics. But also, what about when the president, I like the fact that he put out a list like, here are my justices. Go ahead and start
Yeah,
pre-vetting them now. I
right.
love that. I don't like that Joe Biden doesn't do that. I'm okay-ish with saying, hey, we're going to pick a female, of this. Like, they're all qualified, so it kind of doesn't matter. It's like, yeah, sweet, we're losing a female. Let's get one. Maybe also, because we're not just a black and white nation, let's put somebody from Asia in there or whatever.
Yeah.
I sort of like those things. But in terms of the makeup of this, can we ever get away from a politicized Supreme Court, or is it always going to be this battle for supremacy?
Well, again, as long as here's my conception of it. In the Congress, you have 435 representatives in the House, and you have 100 representative senators in the Senate, right? So you have 535 people plus the president. So there's some breadth of representation. In the Supreme Court, there are 9 persons, right? And it's become now a super legislative body. So that's a very concentrated body, and they are split right down the middle. So when you have such a relationship, it seems to me that's a point of contention. And so every single seat, if you can imagine, is like 50 representatives, right? If you do the math. So it's a very concentrated body, which affects a lot of society by their judicial edicts. So of course, that's like whether you like a king or you don't like a king. Well, if you do or you don't, it's very passionate because he rules. in a manner that's forceful.
I want to come back to the King thing, but I want to, for one more second, stick on the
Sure.
Supreme Court. The we can look at how judges decide things, and it's 100% legitimate to say I want strict constitutionalist people that look at this as like a hard guide, and then it's also 100% fine if you're the president to say I want someone who adapts what was written into a modern context, and that way that gives you your Kagans and your Thomases, right? And
Hmm.
then in the middle, maybe you have someone that like John Roberts has lately been. He's been the deciding vote. But can we just segment judges by their judicial history and say this person is a 7 or a 4, and we need a 4 right now. We don't need a 9, or whatever it is.
I guess that depends on your point of view, which you just mentioned. Do I want an activist judge, or do I want one who's, textual? A textual judge who relies on the Constitution and says, this is the law brought to us by the legislature and approved by the executive. Is it within constitutional guidelines? And that's what a judge is ideally supposed to do. Now, the other view is we can reject laws that we don't like, even though the legislature and executive have given them to us. And it could be a law that was created in 1960, and they can reject it, So if brought back, challenged in the appeal courts.
This has happened this year, and it was funny because, and I'm going to be critical of the left right now. Everybody threw up their hands and was convinced that this horrible court was going to find against the discrimination side for that law from the 60s that talked about what you could and couldn't do discriminatory wise. And at the time, gender and sexual proclivity, it wasn't a thing that they were worried about. And so the court was brought this case to say, help us sort this legislation out. And so the left instantly said it's going to go horribly. It's going to go against us. In fact, it didn't. But the court did their job. They were like, okay, does this law still apply today? And if not, it's not a loss. It's like, okay, now we go to the legislation and say, hey, you need to update this law. I mean, that's exactly what the court is supposed to do, by my understanding.
Yes, by mine too. Let the legislature, who are the representatives of the people, determine what the law should be, because they're answerable. They're elected, and they're the closest. The House of Representatives was created as it was created to be the closest to the populations they represent, and to create law in their interest. And so every 2 years, if your representative has put forward or approved a law you don't like, you can change your representative. That's how it ideally works. And if they want to change a law from 1960, let them vote again. Yeah.
And then the Senate, of course, has that root of sen, seniority, senior, senility, all those things. It was supposed to be, and that's a bit of a crack, but it was supposed to be the branch of wisdom. Like, we've been here, we're looking out for the other aspects of these things. And I think we've lost our way in that the House has celebrities, which I don't think, that's not uncommon, but we shouldn't have celebrity influencing what we all want to do. And then also it seems like, I'll just say it, like when hard legislative decisions are happening, no one's able to whip together the votes to get these things through. We're very ineffective, so yeah. What are your thoughts on the legislature in general in terms of what they're supposed to be doing? Are they doing a good job? What grade would you give them? That's my question.
I think they ceded a lot of power to the executive branch and all the myriad agencies that exist there, and just rubber stamp things that are regulations. I had a number during the Obama administration that in 1 year, 2,300 regulations, which are law, were approved. And 132 laws were created by Congress. So if you see that disparity, you're not being represented. Right. Regulations are coming out of agencies, and they're just edicts that are telling you how to act if you're in one sort of business or another, or whether you can go into a federal park or not. So it's just a difference in a shift of power that has taken place, and the legislature has the power to allow the agencies that power or to take it back. I think they ought to be taking it back.
I want to put my finger squarely at the president. or the presidency, maybe is probably more accurate. But let me take a crack at President Trump here. I am not at all comfortable with his acceleration and increase of executive orders, and he's also bragging on his deregulation efforts. But he's not done that, as far as I understand it. He's not done that through the legislature where they're taking things off the books. He's doing it through presidential fiat.
Right.
That creates opportunities for left, right, left, right, left, right, just chaos. Like you've built your life and your business upon these set of rules, and someone comes in and says, "Never mind all of that. I'm going to spend this $1 trillion. I'm going to do that." I mean, when was the last time Congress declared a war? However, in absence of
Right.
action by the legislature, the executive, I guess, is saying, "If you guys won't do it, I will try to stop me."
Yeah, I agree completely. The idea of presidential powers like that, it's become a bad habit. Executive orders have become a really bad habit. And it is, frankly, in the executive's power to rule over the agencies. And I think that's part of the difficulty. They can do what they like without legislative consent. So yeah, the power has become so packed in the executive office. It has become such a cherry. I compare it to the ring in the Lord of the Rings.
Hmm.
It drives everybody crazy, whether they own the ring or they don't own the ring.
Yeah.
It drives them crazy. So when it's so concentrated in one ring or one office, one person, it creates a great reaction. If you've read the book, Pete, as you have, our concept of government started as the exact opposite.
Right.
All the powers that affected you were right in your neighborhood. All the big decisions were made right there. The only contact you had with a federal government was in a time of war, an emergency. And now the opposite has occurred. And it just goes to the nature of government, the nature of power. It collects power.
Yeah, and then it partners with other power. Like
Right.
for example, we probably have too much institutional influence with corporations. I mean, that wasn't the intent. And
Yeah, I was just reading a very interesting research about the next volume. During the Depression, um, they started the TVA, the Tennessee Valley
Mhm.
Authority, and they began by partnering with Commonwealth and Southern, which was the
Right.
utility company working in the South. And they began as friends. Hey, we're going to help you out. You're going to love us. We're going to give you more power to sell. Da 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 da. They started as a partner, then became the dominant partner, and then devoured them. And then regulated others out of business, where they
Yeah.
just created laws to benefit themselves. Whenever you're in business with the government, you're going to lose if you're a competitor.
And I
There's
guess the
there's not
the
a
other
winning solution.
the counter to that is whenever whenever you privatize something, poor people lose. I mean, in general, poor
Yeah,
people always get the short stick. So again, we're stuck with the balance. We have to balance enough governmental control to control the corporations. But right now, we seem to be like, why don't you guys play together and do whatever the hell you want?
are you talking about the media giants now, the high tech
Yes,
companies?
all of them.
Yeah,
Defense industry, I don't like to say the words big pharma because I don't know what medium pharma is, but all of these places, and the president, to his credit, is saying, "Hey, knock it off. We're not going to have big use wars. We're not going to invest in these things. Hey,
yeah,
pharmaceutical companies, I want your help on these problems, but we're going to get real transparent on what things cost, and we're going to." So I like that attitude, and I don't know if those things will work out, but I have to give Trump a high five for those things. But the corporations hate it, and then their government lackeys, for a better term, they hate it, and they're getting a lot of pressure.
yeah, yeah. Well, again, it's the key word you mentioned, Pete, was balance. There used to be a balance between governance at the local level, governance at the state level, and governance at the federal level. And now it's quite out of balance. And so things become unpredictable. Why? Because 365 people aren't determining things. Thousands of people aren't determining things. One person's determining things and how, the government's going to react to a certain industry. So the balance is kind of struck off.
Going back a few minutes in our conversation, we were talking about it. The things like were really truly like a republic type thing. Where okay, we're all going to stand around the tree. We're going to make a decision, and this is how our community is going to solve fire, water, roads, whatever it was. We've gotten away from that to the point where we're now having a conversation where a union of teachers um, can decide where my kid goes to school, and I'm not allowed to move my kid and the money that's given through the federal government for some reason to put my kid into a better school. We've gotten so far away that the parents and the institutions are saying they're more important than the thing that they're trying to serve, which we all agree is our future, the kids.
Yeah, and that's another great case in point, Pete,
Mm,
because there was a time some time ago where money was routed via the income tax, individual income tax, went through government instead of going directly to educators in your local community. It used to be the
right.
parents who were associated, where the PTA comes from, and the PTA would determine who the principal is, who the teachers are, exactly what the curriculum would be for their kids.
Mm.
And now it's routed through the federal government. And if you do not do what the federal government mandates as education, then you don't get the money.
Yeah.
So you have no say in it any
Right.
longer. The decisions are made in Washington, D.C., among a few people.
And then we can't stand if the person's not from our party. We can't stand who that person is. They become an idiot dullard, who isn't qualified to do the job. But here's the
Right.
thing: I've asked a lot of people this question, like, what makes a good president? Or like this Betsy DeVos person drives the left crazy. And again, I'm picking on the left this time. But if I was to say, speak intelligently about the past 11 Secretary of Educations and, what it takes to be a good person, they wouldn't know. They wouldn't know the first thing. They couldn't tell you two other secretaries of education.
Right.
And so we're really driving ourselves insane about stuff we truly don't care or can't be bothered to know anything about, except for we don't like that person's party.
Yeah. And they're all concentrated 1,000 miles. Well, for me, 1,500 miles from here.
Right.
Right. And nobody knows who they are, really. They were never elected. They were appointed. So you
Yeah.
don't have the grasp. Oh, that's my congressman. His office is down at this address, and I can go talk to him.
Mm.
Now it's a mass of agencies, none of whom are elected, that have lifetime appointments as far as persons within the agency, if not the
Yeah.
secretary. But and it's just too distant. It's too concentrated. They make too many decisions that don't have to do with me. Now imagine if we allowed the states to be the states. California could do whatever the hell it wanted to do. They could create whatever laws they want to create, right? They can call a monkey a man a monkey. It wouldn't matter what they would do, right?
Right.
To us, being in Ohio, say we're in Ohio, and Ohio creates its own laws based on the persons in Ohio. We've gotten far, far from that. So it makes Californians angry when somebody in Washington makes a conservative decision, and it makes people in Ohio angry when somebody in the executive makes a decision based on California law. So it's
Pato Milo put a quote. Pato, you got to shorten them up, buddy. If I put him in, this is what happens. It covers this whole screen. So
that's a big saying.
yeah. As we look at these things, it sounds very libertarian, what you're talking about. Would you put what you're writing about anywhere on a political spectrum at all, or how would you characterize what your research shows?
It shows that the original design of our government, I think, it's my opinion,
Yeah.
is best. The more diffusion of power there is in a society, the more strong all members are, the more respect all members show each other, the more decisions are seen as legitimate, right? It just goes down the line. And things that are of a spiritual nature shouldn't be a matter for civil government. And that's where all the fighting really happens, because you're telling me what to believe, or I'm telling you.
Yeah.
And that's contrary to the original principles of the American government.
I mean, for sure, we are deeply divided, and really, again, we suck at recognizing this, but it's really three segments. There's the left, there's the right, and then there's the folks who are like, I don't like either of you assholes, like,
No, and no, but listen to that, Pete. There's a large, and in America, you're not supposed to care.
yeah,
You should be able to go fishing and not have to care about this stuff. You should be able to go to a ball game and be next to a person who might not agree to everything you think. but not get in a fight.
There is a role that has to be played though by the citizen. Like we are often told, vote, 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 vote. Facebook constantly bugs me to learn more about voting rights, but in reality, that is the least you could do as a citizen. Like if you really want to have power, you should go involve yourself in the government. You don't have to run for office. You could literally volunteer for a committee. You could write to your congressman and say, hey, I know you got work for me. What can I do to help? Or whatever it is. You can get involved at your church, at an NGO, at a charity, any old thing, to be involved and have more individual, to protect your rights, to create the area, the utopia that you want to create.
Yeah, and again, that can be done locally, and that's the way our government was conceived. And think at the local level, the proportion of your vote and how impactful it is when you're voting for, say, the mayor of your town. Let's just call it a town, or at the county level, or the state level. Much more impactful than being one of 330 million, right? So the more decisions are made locally and nearer to the citizen, the more the citizen's representative, and the more the representatives are answerable.
I also am not a fan of how we step over each other's boundaries. Why is Mike Bloomberg investing $100 million, and how the hell is that possible anyhow in Florida to try to tip the election? Excuse me. Like, what are you doing? Why is AOC's ads coming into my feed? You know, you're not my representative.
Exactly.
The person who is my representative is Katie Porter, right? And I voted for her last time. I've sent her 2 emails and never got a response from her team. So guess what? I will not be voting. If I can't talk to you, you can't represent me. But I'm told by people outside of my district how great she is. Like, really? Apparently, to me, she can't handle the basic job of communication internally.
But she should. She's too concentrated on the media in Washington, D.C., and not enough on her constituency. I hear AOC is one of the worst representatives of her people in Washington. But going back to your first point, because she is so much the darling of the media, she'll get reelected for the next 20 years because she's, they love her. So,
and I always want to say, to be fair, like, I'm not trying to pick on the left here. She's my representative is someone who's a Democrat. I picked her because I wanted someone new. I didn't want the last person. I didn't want the incumbent to be around. I typically vote against the incumbent as a norm because I'd like to see some churn there. You know, if you want term limits, vote your person out. And here's the funny thing: when I bring this up to people, Richard, I'll say, "Hey, vote your person out. That's how you do term limits." And they're like, "Whoa, no, I like my guy. I like my guy."
Well, that's your right.
Exactly. You can keep him.
You can
just
keep
don't tell me I have to have term limits.
Well, Pete, I really love being on your show, and I got to run a kid up to an orthodontist.
Yeah, you can do that. Everybody should get DNA of Democracy. Check it out on Amazon and come back on. Let's do another one, maybe like in a few weeks after the election.
I would love to, Pete.
Okay,
really.
I'm going to sign us off. Here we go.